jungle doesn't just have eyes, it has a voice. In the summer of 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy was an unstoppable tide. From the Philippines to the Solomon Islands, the rising sun had swallowed the Pacific. But on a jagged volcanic ridge overlooking the sea, a man named Martin Clemens sat in the mud. He wasn't holding a rifle, he was holding a pencil. And beside him, a group of Solomon Islanders sat in total silence, listening to the horizon. They were not soldiers in uniform, they were coastwatchers. History says the Battle of Guadalcanal was won by carriers and Marines. But the Marines will tell you they were only able to fight because of the ghosts. How did a handful of scouts and a radio change the course of World War II? And what happens when a village decides to keep a secret that could get them all executed? I'm your guide through the archives, and today, the Time Navigator reveals the story of the army that was never there. 1942. The Pacific is a blue desert, and the Japanese are building an oasis of steel. They began constructing an airfield on a remote island called Guadalcanal. If that airfield became operational, Australia would be cut off. The US would lose the war in the Pacific before it truly began. The Allies were blind. They had no radar in the Solomons, no satellite imagery, but they had the Ferdinand Network, named after the bull who preferred to sit and smell the flowers rather than fight. The plan was simple yet suicidal. Leave small teams of Australians and local islanders behind enemy lines. Their job? Hide, watch, report. They lived in caves, in the hollows of banyan trees, and in villages hidden by the canopy. To the Japanese, the islands looked occupied and controlled. To the coastwatchers, the Japanese were walking into a trap they didn't even know was being set. But this wasn't just a military operation. It was a story of a community, because a scout is only as safe as the village that hides him. The primary weapon of the Coastwatcher wasn't the submachine gun, it was the Teleradio. It weighed 100 pounds. It required heavy lead-acid batteries that had to be carried through vertical jungle terrain by hand. One scout, Jacob Vouza, a retired police sergeant, became a legend. He didn't just watch, he hunted. Vouza would slip into Japanese camps at night, counting tents, counting crates, and then vanish before the sun rose. He once whispered to a fellow scout, "The trees are our walls. The rain is our blanket." Every morning, the ghosts would tap out a coded message. 40 bombers heading southeast. That message would travel to Pearl Harbor, then to the carriers. Because of a man in a loincloth with a radio, the US Navy knew the Japanese were coming hours before they appeared on the horizon. The Japanese knew there were spies in the hills. They weren't fools. They began a campaign of terror. They burned villages. They interrogated elders. In a declassified report, a Japanese officer noted, "The natives are sullen. They claim to see nothing. Yet the Americans seem to know our every move." Think about the pressure. One villager wanting to save their own family from a bayonet could have ended the mission. But like the village of Le Chambon, the Solomon Islanders had a collective secret. They shared their meager food with the scouts. They carried the batteries. They became a human radar system made of flesh and blood. The tension broke in August 1942. Jacob Vouza was captured by a Japanese patrol. They found an American flag in his loincloth. They tied him to a tree. They demanded to know where the white men and their radios were. Vouza said nothing. They stabbed him with bayonets. They cut his throat. They left him for dead, still tied to the tree. But Vouza wasn't done. He chewed through his ropes, crawled through miles of jungle, holding his own throat together with his hands, until he reached the American lines. His first words weren't a plea for help. They were intelligence. "The Japanese are coming from the east, 250 men, tonight." Because he refused to break, the Marines were ready. The Battle of the Tenaru was a slaughter because one man chose silence over life. The turning point wasn't a single bomb, it was a realization. The Japanese High Command realized they weren't fighting an army, they were fighting the islands themselves. In the modern day, historians have uncovered the journals of Martin Clemens. He wrote about the unbearable loneliness of being a ghost, but he also wrote about the islanders. I am the head, but they are the heart. Without them, I am just a man dying in the mud. The revelation is this: Guadalcanal wasn't won by superior technology. It was won because the Allies had the moral high ground of the local population. The Ghost Army provided over 90% of the early warning intelligence during the campaign. Admiral Halsey later said, "The Coastwatchers saved Guadalcanal, and Guadalcanal saved the Pacific." Yet for decades, their names, Vouza, Gumu, Nano, were footnotes. After the war, the jungle reclaimed the bunkers. The teleradios rusted into the soil. Jacob Vouza was knighted, but most of the ghosts simply went back to their gardens. They didn't ask for medals. They didn't write memoirs. Their legacy is the fact that the Pacific stayed free. But there is a deeper lesson here for us, navigating our own time. We often think of power as the loudest voice, the biggest fleet, or the most followers. But history shows us that real power often sits in the silence. It's the power of the person who watches and waits, the power of the community that agrees as one to protect the truth. History forgets the noise of the bombs, but it can never quite silence the whispers of the jungle. The Coastwatchers remind us that you don't need a uniform to be a hero. You just need a clear view and the courage to report what you see, even when the world is looking the other way. So the next time you feel small, like a lone voice against a tide, remember the ghosts of the Solomon Islands. They didn't have a fleet. They had a radio and a secret, and they changed the world. What truth are you watching for today? If you believe that courage is often quiet, subscribe to the Time Navigator, because the most important stories are the ones history tried to whisper. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.